China is on a diplomatic blitz and the West is taking note. In recent months, Xi Jinping has met with world leaders seeking to re-establish ties and settle disagreements. Analysts say that Beijing's engagements are an attempt to counter Washington's improvements in ties with countries around the world. But at the same time, Beijing has an eye on its own foreign policy goals. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko is on a state visit to China at Xi Jinping's invitation. A longtime ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, Lukashenko allowed his country to be used as a launchpad for Russia's invasion back in February of 2022. Kiev has expressed concerns that Belarus could again support Moscow in its war efforts. With weapons, soldiers and specialized equipment, Russia and Belarus have beefed up their joint military grouping. French President Emmanuel Macron says that he will be visiting China in April. He is seeking Xi Jinping's help to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Macron has welcomed China's peace efforts. However, the French president says that peace is only possible if Russia withdraws troops and respects the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine. And it isn't just French president who will be visiting China in the coming days. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Charles Michel may also visit soon. As per China's ambassador to the European Union, preparations for the visit by two top officials of the EU are underway. Envoy Fu Kong says that frequent high-level mutual visits between the EU and China are expected to begin soon. EU diplomats have criticized China's refusal to describe the Russia-Ukraine conflict as an invasion. Beijing has also refused to call for a Russian withdrawal from Ukrainian territory. As per the Chinese government, EU's anger with Beijing over Ukraine is irrational. China says that it does not want the issue to affect the development of ties between the bloc. Beijing's approach towards the Ukraine war has centered around avoiding any direct criticism of Russia. At the same time, China has managed to project the United States as a strategic rival. Just last week, China helped scuttle a joint statement condemning the war at a G20 gathering in India. Despite the US and allies' continued ambitious efforts to bolster the Ukrainians, there are no signs of the end game in the war. The Russia-Ukraine conflict seems destined to enter an even more complicated phase in the coming months. China recently published a 12-point position paper that called for urgent peace talks and a political settlement to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky too has expressed hopes to meet Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, calling it important for world security. China's economy has been battered by the now abandoned zero-COVID policy. The nation is being neglected by foreign investors who see a return of state intervention in the global market. And for more on this, we are being joined by Greg Swenson, who is an international affairs expert and a China analyst. Welcome to the broadcast, Greg. Now, China is surprisingly emerging as a big player in this war. It has had a no-limit partnership with Russia, but at the same time, Xi Jinping has released a peace plan. How are you assessing this duality?
Well, I think it's clear that China is supporting Russia and Putin with its rhetoric, but maintaining some degree of distance and not getting too involved in the conflict. And, as you know, they have not sent lethal weapons or any kind of materiel to Russia, but there is some suspicion by the U.S. that they are considering that. Can't be sure of the sources of that, but basically Secretary of State Blinken has indicated that intelligence sources are leading him to believe that. So, they are trying to maintain some neutrality. I thought the 12-point proposition was okay, but it sort of lacked any real detail, and it was a nice gesture, but we'll see if there's anything to that, and of course we all look forward to Macron's visit, and hopefully something will come of that as well. But it looks like they're kind of riding that fine line between supporting Russia without getting directly involved.
Now, Greg, we are seeing a kind of a shift in diplomacy here. The French president is going to visit Beijing. We are hearing the EU chief might also make a visit. Then of course, there is the Ukrainian president who's showing willingness for dialogue. Now, I understand that there are apprehensions involved in this, but Would you brand this the starting of a changing world order of sorts?
Well, I don't think it's a changing of world order. There's no secret that China is trying to align with, this new axis of I wouldn't call it axis of evil yet, but surely Iran and Russia and China together would not be something that's welcomed by the West. But, I think that these are gestures coming from the EU, coming from Macron, that could be helpful. Remember, China is very dependent on world trade. Granted, there are arguments to be made that the U.S. has created some dependency, some supply chain dependency on China, and that needs to be remedied. And I think you'll see that from the National Security or from the House Committee on China, specifically on competition with the CCP. But it's important to the Europeans to maintain some dialogue here. But there's also dependency by China. Right now, China is trading $2 billion of goods per day with the United States, and they have similar trade numbers with the EU or with Europe in general. So I don't think that China can walk away from, healthy dialogue with the Europeans, with the West.
All right, before I let you go, how optimistic are you about countries like China and India who claim to be neutral help end this war?
Well, not very at this point. They clearly have chosen to take sides. They're benefiting from some of this economic and trade disruption. For example, India is buying oil from the Russians at very cheap prices, and that's of course driven by China doing the same thing. So I don't think it's helpful that Lukashenko, from Belarus, is going to China. I think it just proves that he's really an errand boy for Putin. He's really yes, he'll be transmitting key messages without strictly being Russia or coming from Russia, but they obviously are. So look, I think there's some concerns in the West with this development between China, Russia, and Iran. I think Belarus is relatively meaningless, although they are supporting the Russian war effort. But Belarus on its own is not a meaningful player. But this should be something that is addressed by the West, and to make sure that we can get some support from the global South before they align too much with China and or Russia.
All right. Thank you for all those insights, Greg Swenson.
Sure. Thanks for having me.